Hey folks, Drew here from Will and Drew's Gaming Retrospective. You're about to listen to part 2 of our 2-part interview with Patrick and James from the Retro Spectives Podcast. Part 1 was a blast. If you haven't heard it yet, go back and check that out before we dive into part 2 here. But part 2, we cover a lot of ground, including Patrick's love for Dark Souls, fighting games, and the learning curve associated with them, and so much more, including our infamous lightning round. We really hope you enjoy this, and we hope that you take the time to check out their podcast as well. You can do so by looking them up on iTunes or anywhere you get your podcasts, Retro Spectives Podcast, or you can find them at rspodcast.net. And of course, you can find us all over the web as well, too. www.WDGRPodcast.com is WDGRPodcast.com. Hit us up on social media at WDGRPodcast. Really hope you enjoy this episode. And stop on by our Discord room and say hi and ask James and Patrick all sorts of questions about their show. And swing on by their Discord too. Say hello. Thanks for listening, everybody. So let's move a little bit further down the gaming timeline with you guys. You kind of explained where you got started. So what was the next step? James, we're going to start with you on this one.
The next step? Oh boy. When you say the next step, you mean kind of progressing into the middle years?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I think I played a lot of World of Warcraft when I was, in my teen years at my parents' house. I remember, and actually Counter-Strike, this will be to Patrick's surprise, I had this friend who would take me to these net cafes near our house, and all they had was World of Warcraft and Counter-Strike Source, so we just played those two games for hours and hours on end after school, spending a lot of our pocket money on time, even though we had our own computers. But it was a really, social experience. You could play Counter-Strike. Sometimes we installed Warcraft 3 Dota and played that. But, I think going to a LAN cafe and, playing with a bunch of mates is a really different experience than hanging out in Discord with a bunch of friends. And I really miss that, actually.
Same. I mean, I don't know if we had those, Drew, but we had similar things, I want to say, back in the day.
Well, there's been a kind of a struggling market for LAN cafes over the past 10 years, maybe,
yeah.
I want to say.
At least.
I've seen a lot of, we call them, friendly local game shops. And a lot of those will kind of diversify. They'll sell video games. They'll sell board games. They'll sell Magic the Gathering, and then they'll have a section kind of off to the side for, LAN gaming, or, you pay a flat fee, you go in, you play on a console for an hour, or whatever the case is. They have different ways of doing it. And overwhelmingly, most of them close within 6 months. And it's really heartbreaking to see, There used to be pretty strong markets for LAN cafes up this way, I would say 10 years ago. But once broadband became more prevalent,
yeah,
it kind of died out.
Well, it was super important for us here in Australia because, as you may or may not know, our internet here is completely garbage.
It's so bad.
Oh, no. It's so bad. I'm on a terrible connection myself. We get what, like 20 megabits per second down between the whole house here, maybe 1 megabit upload. It's horrendous. If I want to play a game like, I got into Rainbow Six Siege a couple years ago, and that game's like 60 gigabytes or something. It'll take me like 5 days of solid downloading to be able to play that game. It's pretty.
I can identify
insane
with that.
Yeah, whenever we do the podcast and I have to upload a new episode, I tether my phone because my mobile broadband's just way faster than my home connection.
Yeah. Do you either of you remember the launch of Half-Life 2 when it came out?
Yes.
No.
Oh man, we're talking about foundational memories.
So Half-Life 2 was also launched with the launch of Steam. Mm-hmm. And even if you bought a physical copy of the game, you still needed to install Steam, authenticate the game with Steam, and then download a ton of assets. In fact, I think essentially the disc was basically nothing more than a license. And at the time, I had dial-up. I did not have broadband yet.
Same.
And needless to say, I didn't play Half-Life 2 when it came out.
Yeah.
So with Half-Life 2, I couldn't get it working till I got my third copy. Had to bring it back twice. And the thing is, I can't remember. It could have been that I was just incompetent and didn't understand how to set it up. Like, that may have been because it was the first time I'd ever been exposed to something like Steam. So it could have very well been that I just brought back 2 perfectly fine working copies of Half-Life 2. But the people at EB Games were just letting anyone bring it back because they didn't know how it worked either. But yeah, that was something special, Half-Life 2. It was such a disastrous launch of Steam.
Yeah. But what a magical game. I mean, that game is just so tremendous on so many levels.
Is it though?
And the ending. Oh
it
my
is.
God.
You bite your tongue.
Is it though?
I kind of agree with James that mechanically Half-Life 2 has
I didn't
aged
actually
very poorly.
play the game until a few years ago because people were always telling me how good this game was. And I got up to this bit in the game where you have this like hover boat that you take over the river, and that section filtered me pretty hard. I just stopped playing right there.
I will concede that anytime you have control of a vehicle in that game, it is a disaster. And it doesn't matter what the vehicle is. They all suck. But outside of that, I think if you can, kind of get past that hurdle, I think there's some of the best gaming ever made.
Half-Life 2 suffers from the whole Seinfeld is unfunny sort of thing, where it introduced so many ideas that playing it now seems quaint. Like, one of the big things that Half-Life 2 did that no one else had done at the time was it had the Havoc physics engine. It had all these objects that had physical properties, basically never been done before. And so in order to show it off, there's all these physics puzzles in Half-Life 2 where you have to do a seesaw sort of thing.
Yeah.
And you play it now and you're like, why am I doing a seesaw puzzle for the 4th time in a row? What is going on?
It's funny how impressive those physics things were back in the day. I remember going on huge tangents at school every day because I got my hands on a copy of Oblivion, the Elder Scrolls 4th game. And there was this bit in the tutorial where there's this arrow stuck in a bucket, and the bucket, because the arrow is weighing it down, is like leaning from a rope on a slant, and I spent 20 minutes putting the arrow back in the bucket at different angles to see how it would tilt. And then I was very obsessed with this specific physics interaction. I think I talked the ear off a couple of my housemates about what is pretty boring by today's standards, honestly.
For me, it was once you got a hold of the gravity gun and they throw you into that bathroom section, like just seeing how many toilets I could break.
Yes, every single one. Yeah.
Oh my God.
The gravity gun was actually brilliant. That was the best addition to that game. That's what I like. I liked how it went from physics puzzles to the gravity gun, and then without getting too spoilery for the few human beings on the Earth who haven't played it, the final section of the final thing in the Citadel, it's something you've wanted to do the entire game, and you finally get to do it, and it feels great.
Yeah, I mean they took the time to kind of introduce you to all these different things that you were going to be experiencing later on, and they kind of put it behind the guise of puzzle solving. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was really very clever the way they introduced those physics.
I'm one of the few people that has not really played the game. I've only played maybe a couple hours, and I've had the game forever. I think it was like a free Steam game or something. I don't remember the backstory, but I do remember when it was in its prime, a lot of people were talking about how good the AI was. Was that really a thing, or is that just a bad memory that I have?
Half-Life 1 certainly got a lot of praise for its AI because it sounded like the troops were, communicating with one another and they'd flank you and throw grenades. I think Half-Life 2 era, the real AI killer was definitely a game called Fear. I don't know if you've ever heard of Fear.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, so Fear was, which I think was, it must have been close to being a contemporary of Half-Life 2. Maybe it was just after 2005 or 6. But that game had excellent AI, and the level design was kind of very boxy and boring, but the AI in that game was unparalleled. Half-Life 2's AI was fine, I thought, but I didn't think it was that big an improvement over the original one's AI.
Yeah, I think Half-Life 2's succession was really from the world that it built, the narrative that it was building, the sounds, the graphics. The graphics
were unbelievable at the time,
and they still look really good. Between with all the patches that they've sent out, the 4K patches and everything. I think that engine has just held up incredibly well over the years.
The Source engine has a very distinct look to it. I'm not sure what it is, but, when I see a game made on Source 2, sorry, not Source 2, the original Source engine, it's on Source, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I never even considered that.
Yeah.
Very good point.
I didn't really like Half-Life 2, but I loved the Portal games. And
Portal, yeah.
Portal. And
Portal's a masterpiece. The first one in particular is a masterpiece.
Yeah, I think...
We gotta find a way to do a co-op run-through of that, Drew.
Oh, it would be so much fun.
Dude, it is one of the best co-op games ever made. It might even be the best. It is so brilliant.
Is co-op even the correct description of it? It's more like a counter-op game, right? Like, you spend the whole time just trying to fuck over your partner in every way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah, but that just doubles the run length. If you actually cooperate, it would take 6 hours. As it is, it takes 12.
Yeah. Well, I think every stage you get into, you kind of get that out of your system. You go in, you're like, all right, I'm going to throw him into a burning pile of lava or something.
The levels are so obviously designed to do that too. Like, I remember there's this one where your partner goes through this big vertical maze while you have access to this button that raises and lowers the platforms, and you can just crush your partner every 2 seconds, and then you get into these loops where you're like, okay, this time I'll let you get to the end, just trust me. Okay.
If you were speedrunning it would take 20 seconds. It usually takes 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, those are games that I have not played in a very long time, and they are tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. Will, we have to figure this out.
I know. I mean, like I said, I think once before on a different episode that I used to watch a lot of videos. I was watching a series of these two YouTubers that were pretty famous that were running through the game together, and it was one of the most entertaining, series of videos that I think I've ever seen on YouTube.
I'm looking at the platforms that the game was released on, and the only one that you have currently is PlayStation 3, and I guess they did release it on Mac, so I'm wondering if that's through Steam.
Okay.
I wonder if that's something we could do.
We can investigate.
Yeah, that's something to look into, because I have no idea if the Steam client would allow multiplayer over multi-platforms.
Yeah, I don't know.
Do either of you guys know?
I'm not too sure.
I'm not sure, sorry. I don't really... All of my friends just have PCs. Actually, Sean has a Mac. Oh, but he's also got a PC, so I think he plays games on his PC.
Yeah, I mean, nobody in their right mind plays games on a Mac, so...
Yeah.
I don't even.
Yeah, I think my gut feeling says yes, just because it's Valve, and it's, the Valve title. So it's one of the big ones, one of the big launch titles. So I imagine they would have built it in such a way that you could play PCs and Macs together for that title, even if you couldn't do anything else.
That's definitely something we have to look into.
Yeah, one thing you guys definitely have to do if you do it is try some of the custom co-op maps you find online. Me and one of my roommates tried to play through a few of those, and they are 10, 20 times harder than the ones you get in the campaign. They are real head scratchers, yeah, but very rewarding to get through.
I wasn't aware that there was a custom community.
Yeah,
there's endless stream of content.
There's so much out there. It's really good too. You can find a lot of the stuff on curated websites. We definitely got at each other's throats a few times when we were doing it, but
oh, that's awesome!
It's so much fun.
That's fantastic. Got to check that out, definitely. So let's see here. Who do we leave off with? Because I'm so confused.
We started with me.
Okay,
I think it was James,
Patrick,
yeah.
your turn. What was next for you?
Well, the big one for me was Counter-Strike. Like, I got very serious about Counter-Strike, and at the time I was playing, it was Counter-Strike Source. I got so serious, I was like, there were times where I was traveling interstate in order to play in some LANs, like competitive competitions in person for Counter-Strike. I was never, the best player. I was never in the top team, but we were always, one of the top 4 teams. I mean, eventually I got to one of the top 4 teams, and I was amongst the best players. It's quite funny because I recognize a lot of the Australian players that are on the CSGO Pro Circuit now, including one of the funniest Australian commentators, a bloke called Sponge. So Chad Birchall. So he played with him a lot back in the day.
That's awesome.
So yeah, Counter-Strike, I played way too much of that game. I still play way too much of that game. It's a very relaxing game for me nowadays, just because I can kind of play it on autopilot because I've played it to death.
Were you like one of the guys that would like bring your PC with you to these events?
Yes. So the
Nice.
2 types of LANs, the ones which were at the LAN cafes that we were talking about, and then the BYOCs, the bring your own computer. I used to, get my backpack and I'd stuff my keyboard and mouse pad and everything in there. It would sit out awkwardly, but whatever. And then you'd kind of, grab your PC awkwardly and lug it along behind you. It was pretty ridiculous. But those bring your own PC ones, they basically hired out a big hall, and everyone would bring their own PCs and set up. Nowadays, that's not really a thing. That's a bit ridiculous. You just go to a LAN cafe. But I don't know. It was once a very normal thing to hire out a hall, and everyone gets tables and they play their PC games.
That's awesome.
No, it's good fun.
Missed that time period.
Yeah, like that. It's so crazy, like how that sort of thing has just kind of evolved out of the gaming sphere, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the idea is that the places where you go to play those sorts of games now, it just makes much more sense to go to a LAN cafe where they've got all the infrastructure set up. Because otherwise, there were constant network issues, for example, because every time you had one of these things, you had to have a guy setting up the network, and those games didn't have the most well-optimized network, so it was just constant issues. But now you can just go to an internet cafe and everything just generally works just fine. So yeah, it's interesting. It's a relic of his time. It's probably never going to happen again. But it was good while it happened.
So what made you kind of step away from the competitive scene?
I mean, I think it's like anything. You just gradually fade out. It was a competitive scene, but it wasn't a competitive scene as we understand competitive video games today, with people being paid, thousands and thousands of dollars to compete at the top level. It was just, the first prize in the top competition would be $500 for the entire team. So you get $100. So it was competitive, but it was ultimately amateur. And, as you start going to, as other stuff starts to pop up in your life, you pull away from specific video games. So I had a really good run with the game, but I couldn't keep doing that for 15 years. I'll still play Counter-Strike. I'm still pretty good at Counter-Strike, but you have to dedicate so much of your time to playing competitively, and I guess I just stopped wanting to give up that time.
It's fair.
Competitive gaming is something that's always kind of fascinated me. It's something I've always, I think, deep down wanted to do. But it's wonderful, right? Like, I'm a pretty competitive person, and I like playing hard games, and I like pushing myself to succeed in multiplayer games. But the truth is, competitive gaming and gaming are just two completely separate beasts. Like, the way you approach a competitive game is just completely different to how you approach that same game in a casual sense. And of course it's a spectrum and there's a lot of overlap, but there is something wonderful about try-harding with a bunch of other people who are try-harding and trying to maximize your equity. As Will has just posted, Cartman with pimples on his face as he's taking a shit in a bottle. That's exactly who I was. Well, maybe not quite that bad, but
yeah, there's something really fun about being on a team of like-minded players, and you all try harding and trying to, do everything you can to squeeze every single ounce out of the game. I think problems emerge when you have people, different people in different groups with competing goals. Like, I couldn't play Counter-Strike with my friends because the way I played Counter-Strike and the way I felt about Counter-Strike was just completely different to how they engaged with it. So that was a kind of a bit of a problem. But there
was
were
it
other
like
games
a source of frustration?
Yeah, a lot of frustration because I'd want to be playing the game in a very serious fashion with call-outs and everyone communicating and, us ecoing and doing buy rounds, all stuff that I took for granted, and they just wanted to fuck around and have a good time, which is fine, of course. And nowadays I can adjust my, my level of engagement and enthusiasm based on who I'm with because I'm an adult. But at the time it was difficult for me.
Yeah, I would have loved to be a part of that scene, and unfortunately, I was never a part of that.
All right, well, we just had a technical issue, and all of us got disconnected from our voice call. but we are back with Patrick and James from the Retro Spectives Podcast. Thanks again for joining us, guys. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Awesome to be here.
So, Will, where did we leave off?
So I remember I was actually saying that I wish I was a part of the competitive sort of gaming scene, like Patrick was speaking on in terms of Counter-Strike and just being part of, those big LAN parties, if you will. And I did some private ones at friends' houses, but I never got involved with something that involved money or anything that was just a sort of slightly competition level. But I would have loved and probably would still enjoy participating in something like that at some point in my life because I enjoy watching some of those, MLG type of videos that you sometimes catch on streams and stuff. It's pretty exhilarating.
Mm-hmm.
At its heart, it's not really too far removed from regular sports, and I think that's the key. Like, think about it like how you play, soccer or football you Americans call it soccer as well. Think about how you play soccer with your mates where you're just kicking a ball around and fucking around versus, a proper game of soccer when you're on a team. And that's exactly the same with video games. Both can be fun and both are really enjoyable. And there's a place for both of them.
Yeah, right. It's a good way of explaining it actually.
It's like, what I would consider like a normal night of gaming with my friends would be like a training evening for you, Mm-hmm. Like you're practicing, you're not playing. It's a different mentality.
Exactly, yeah.
So, what's beyond Counter-Strike? Like, where'd you go from there?
Well, I think it's about time to talk about the big game. So there's a long running. I wouldn't call it a joke, but there's a long running theme on every podcast episode that I need to bring up. Probably, I think at this point it's one of my favorite games of all time.
I think I've been waiting for this, but I'm not 100% sure. Go on.
And that game is, of course, Dark Souls.
There it is.
Because Dark Souls was, for me, and continues to be, I think, one of the greatest video games ever made. It's a heavily flawed game, but it taught me the value of getting good. And I think the thing about getting good and the phrase get good is that it's a terribly misunderstood phrase, one that has become, a symbol of internet elitism. But I actually think the origin of the phrase is quite interesting, and I think that the meaning behind it is fascinating. So, with Dark Souls, one of the things that defines it as interesting is that at some stage you have to get better at the game in order to overcome its challenges. So people would post to 4chan, as you'll want to do with these games, because at first they were very small indie darlings in a lot of ways. They would say, how do I beat Ornstein and Smoke? How do I beat this boss? And people would post the same advice. They'd say, okay, what you need to do is keep your shield up, look for openings in their movements when they're not overlapping, use the pillars to create space between them. And people would say, I've tried doing that, it's not working. What weapon should I equip? What magic spell should I use? what buff should I use for my weapon? And people would say, that stuff doesn't really matter. You just need to learn the game's mechanics and then you'll eventually beat it. People are like, this is bullshit, this boss fight is unfair. And then these people in their frustration would say, you just need to get good. That's what it's about. There is no trick, there's no shortcut, there's no magic potion that will solve your problems. The process of beating a boss in Dark Souls is dying 50 times as you learn the mechanics and you very gradually improve and are eventually able to beat it. And I'm bad at Dark Souls. Even today, I'm not incredible at these games. Sekiro, there are certain bosses in Sekiro. There was one that took me, I was counting, it took me 86 attempts.
Ooh, Jesus Christ.
So literally 86 attempts. It was hours for me to beat this boss. So the thing is, I'm not great at these games. I'm not intrinsically great at them like I am at CS. But what Dark Souls taught me is that failure and dying is okay. Like that's the game. The game is failing a lot, but gradually improving every time until you have the abilities to overcome the challenges in front of you.
100%.
And before I played these games, that concept was kind of alien to me. Like, video games were a thing to be won. Video games were a thing to be beaten. They weren't necessarily a challenge to be overcome. So, there are many other reasons I love Dark Souls, but if I go into them, I'll be here literally all night. So I'll just hone in on that one thing. Getting good and the corrupted meaning of it, it's become this elitist thing, but at the heart of it, it's just failure is okay, and you'll eventually get there. You just need to try again, and you'll get there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I'm with you, Patrick. It's definitely one of my most beloved games of all time, and Drew's heard me speak on it quite a few times, and I could also talk for hours, and I don't want to because we don't have the time for it. But everything you said, I think the way that you kind of framed that is really kind of brilliant, because it's exactly how I think most people feel. And I feel like the get good thing also is definitely a symbol of elitism, unfortunately, and there's a lot of truth behind it. But unfortunately, it's kind of gotten a little bit lost in the internet world, and now people are like, oh, shut up with that stuff. And it's like, well, there is some prevalence with it. The same rule applies with Sekiro. You kind of just have to get better. There isn't really a way to kind of cheat the system. You just have to learn to get better. And I think that along the years before Dark Souls and games like that came out, games were kind of getting a little bit easier, and you were being, sort of drug along by a rope, by the game system, by like the way that it tells you to go this way, and too many prompts on the screen. And again, Drew's heard me ramble about stuff like that before, and it's a real thing. Games have become quite a bit easier, and now games are starting to move into the Dark Souls sort of engineering aspect of like, how do we make these games a little bit more difficult, because people are starting to enjoy that now.
It's a whole genre now.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know, like I think there's a fine balance. I think once a game starts punishing you for not being good enough, it's kind of losing sight of the challenge, just becoming sadistic.
I don't actually think these games are that hard, and I say this because one of my roommates, he grew up kind of like Patrick, mostly playing PC games. He lived with me, and this is actually the same person that lived on my couch for 8 months. He had never held a controller in his hand in his life. Like, no joke, he'd never played a console game. He'd only played PC, right? His first console game ever was Bloodborne, and he was able to beat both it and the DLC despite having never played a console game before, just because he understood the value of persistence and learning. I think basically anybody who's going to play these games is going to have that experience where you're stuck on a boss for 50 tries, but that's part of the game, right? Nobody is going to beat that in under 10 or so tries. I think these games can be beaten by brute force, within a reasonable time frame.
Well, that's my point, right? I think that basically the concept of difficulty, you need to have a change of mindset when it comes to the Souls games. Like, if you just view it as terms of how many times did I die in order to, beat this boss, then yeah, it's going to seem ridiculously difficult. But if you stop looking at deaths in terms of as failures and instead as learning experiences, then suddenly it's not so bad. Like the process of playing a game like Dark Souls involves dying a lot. That's how you learn. Because when the attacks are punishing and kill you, you should be better able to avoid them the next time it happens. And, they might have 5 to 10 attack patterns and you need to learn them all. You'll get there eventually, and it's okay to die 50 times. That's the game. The game is dying a lot and gradually mastering a difficult fight.
Yeah, and I think in a post-Souls world, I'm a much more... patient gamer when it comes to trying like butting my head against a wall 1,000 times in order to beat a challenger. One of the games that Patrick and I really loved in recent times was Celeste, which wasn't too difficult.
Yes.
When you're just beating the story. But the game post-story has a lot of optional levels in order to kind of like push you to your limit. On probably the hardest level in the game, the game counts how many deaths you have, and I have well over 2,000 deaths on that level. But I loved the whole process of learning that level, and the reward of finally being able to beat it was unmatched. And the same, for most of the Souls bosses. Once you finally, push yourself to learn every ounce of that boss fight and you finally beat it, it feels incredible, which I don't think you get from a lot of easier titles.
Mm-hmm. Celeste also weaves in the process of dying into the story, not the act of dying itself, but the act of failing as part of the narrative that they're trying to get across. And I think that helps with that game as well too.
Yeah, Dark Souls is a lot more nihilistic, which is one of the reasons I love its story and world. I think it actually has a similar message at the heart of it that failure is okay, and that giving up is the problem, and as long as you persist, it gives you meaning, etc., etc. But it's far more subtle than something like Celeste, which I actually think has a simple but quite well tuned story as well.
Yeah. Celeste is one of my favorite games of the past few years. It's just so tremendous.
Good. Yeah, it feels so good.
Yeah, it's tight. It's responsive. I mean, control wise, it's I think everything it needs to be. But the story, the music,
the music's
the
so
characters,
good.
Everything about that game. The music is tremendous in that game. Will, it's a game you really need to play.
It's on my radar. And I also want to say, just on the topic of Dark Souls, I think that, Patrick, you probably agree with this, a lot of people have speculated not only the lore of the game and the creativity and mystery behind it, but also how you can apply a lot of aspects of how Dark Souls is engineered to your own life or to life in itself, in terms of the challenges that you face and how deaths are fair in that game for the most part. So if you're dying, then it's your fault. And you kind of have a lot of self-reflection, I feel like, when you play those games, if you have that kind of open mind about it.
Yeah, you have to take ownership of your failures. And,
yes.
But that also gives you ownership of your successes, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, it's a wonderful game.
So, James, before Patrick introduced Dark Souls to the discussion, you kind of groaned a little bit. Can you... Give us a little insight on that, please.
We don't have all day to listen to Patrick talk about Dark Souls, but if you do want to hear him talk about it some more, listen to any of our episodes, and you'll find a little tidbit in there somewhere. I think there was maybe 2 episodes I counted where we didn't mention it. Wow. Actually, I was kind of upset with myself. I was thinking to myself, we've got... I think it was one of the recent ones, actually. It might have been the Tribes episode. We'd almost gotten to the end without mentioning it once, and then without thinking, I slipped the Dark Souls reference. Damn it!
You guys should do a highlight reel and just do like a compilation of, in Dark Souls, and it's just like constantly brought up. That would be hilarious.
Yeah, do like a little counter in the corner of the video.
Yeah. I just can't help it.
There's a bit of a running joke in our Discord as well that we bring it up every single episode.
There are just so many things about that game that I love to pieces. I love the minimalist storytelling. I think it's one of the best stories in video games ever told because so much of it is in the background and so much of it is elusive. I think that the world design of Dark Souls 1 in a way has never actually been matched or bettered. Dark Souls 1 has a continuous world that's all connected together. The later games like Sekiro and Dark Souls 3 do a really good job of creating, I guess, smaller loops and really good level design on a smaller scale. But the macro level design of Dark Souls is perfect, and I think it's brilliant. I love the way the minimalistic RPG systems in the game. The basic longsword you get at the beginning of the game is enough to carry you through the entire game. You can just kill everything with a longsword, but there are a bunch of in-depth RPG systems there to min-max if you really want to. They're there, but they're not necessary. It's more about getting good at the fundamental mechanics. Like I said, I could talk about this all day, so I better stop myself.
This one time I tried to get through the game with nothing but my fists, like no weapons, not even fist weapons, just my fists. And I remember distinctly there was this boss, Havel, who's at the bottom of this tower, and he's very heavily armored. And on my successful attempt at killing Havel with just my bare hands, it took me about
8 hours.
55 minutes, of only backstabbing him. You know, every backstab with my fists would take off like a sliver of his health. And if he hit me, I died instantly because I had no health on that character. So it was. I don't know why I did that to myself.
I don't know why you did either.
I quit. Yeah, I quit at Ornstein and Smough very quickly into realizing that I would not be able to do that for it.
I can already hear like Havel just clunking around with this giant like dragon tooth, and you just dancing around him.
It's just the first time you see Havel, he sprints at you as well. Like
oh my god, it's terrifying.
He's so fast.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I don't know if any of you guys play Tekken at all. There's this character Bob in Tekken, which is this quite large man who's actually like one of the faster characters, and he is very scary when he's running across at you from the other side of the screen.
I don't think I've had the pleasure of playing as or against Bob. It must be from one of the newer games.
I think he's in 7. I don't play the series much. I just remember playing it a lot in university against some people that I later ended up moving in with.
One of my closest friends is obsessive about Tekken, so that he was the only other person that had a copy of the game other than me at the time. And if I ever played against him, it was just not fun. So I decided that it was just better not to play the game at all.
Yeah,
I've been trying to get Patrick into fighting games for years now, but I haven't found the right one to kind of hook him into it. We've got a couple friends who are big into it, but trying to get Patrick to come play has not been very fruitful.
Will and Drew are actually perfect people to speak to about this because they love their fighting games, but I've never played one in my life.
Excellent.
Yeah. Have you tried Soul Calibur?
No. Part of the problem is that
Patrick hasn't tried any of them. So he hasn't even dipped his toes yet.
So number one, fighting games intimidate me. Like, I find it reminds me a lot of my attempts to play StarCraft 2. And I know, honestly, I know you're like, but StarCraft 2 is an RTS. But the thing is, I can feel the complexity and precision and potential for, you know, it being a crazy high skill cap game when I sit down with my clunkiness in front of the controllers with no idea what to do. And I'm intimidated because I'm like, I just feel like I'm playing shit. Like every movement I make, I feel like I'm playing absolute garbage. And I can't really play against my real life friends because they're all so much better than I am, even at something as simple as, you know, Super Smash Brothers. So playing against them feels awful because their skill level is so much higher than me. So I've never felt the urge to play a fighting game, and I'm kind of scared of starting one.
Well, it's scary. I think Soul Calibur is a good starting point. I would say specifically the first one, because it doesn't have a ton of different systems that it's, you know, layering on, like, the newest one I think has some kind of crazy super system. I haven't really tried it too much beyond a quick play at Comic-Con. Mm-hmm. But, the very first game is incredibly detailed, incredibly in-depth with the fighting style, and every character has their own way of fighting. Each character feels distinctly unique. And I think it's a good place to start, too, because there are some unlockable characters, and a lot of cases, the only way to unlock those characters is by beating the game with certain other characters. So it forces you to kind of sample each person, and by doing that, you get an understanding of their play styles. And by getting an understanding of their play styles, you get an understanding of how to beat them.
It's incredibly fun, too. I think that's a really good choice, Drew. I mean, Soul Calibur is it's so epic, even just starting up the game. I think it adds a lot of enjoyment to starting out into fighting games, whereas like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter might be a little bit too intimidating still.
Yeah, I mean, the soundtrack for the game is amazing. If you can get your hands on a copy of it for the Dreamcast, it still looks great, in my opinion. And, it's a game that you can get away with button mashing if you need to, but
I really don't want to. That's one of the things I don't want to. That doesn't feel good to me. That doesn't feel like I'm playing the game. It feels like I'm flailing about randomly.
I agree. And, it's... But I think when you're walking into a game that's so daunting, it's hard not to button mash a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
So,
James, what do you think?
I think Soul Calibur is a great series. Soul Calibur, the one on the PlayStation 3, not the current iteration, but the previous one, was probably the fighting game that really got me into fighting games in general. That and Street Fighter 4. And I think that it's very new player friendly, honestly, compared to a lot of other titles. And I hear that 3 in particular is really beloved by the fan base. I think the main thing for us is ultimately I get to force Patrick to play a fighting game if I choose it for the week. But I think finding one with a good single player campaign is going to be really important for, the kind of structure of our show.
Yeah, I mean, fighting games aren't really known for their campaigns.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of the tricky part.
It's a problem.
Mortal Kombat, especially the new ones, I feel, at least kind of address that. They give you a story to follow, and I think it was Mortal Kombat X I was playing around with a couple months ago. And, you're kind of jumping from character to character throughout the campaign. You're not picking a character and running through it.
But is that better? Is it better? Because I wonder, there's no way you can make a good story out of a game where the different characters get into a one-on-one fight, right? It's ridiculous, right? It's a stupid premise. So I wonder if it would be better just to have, pick a character, fight 10 fights. That absence of a story may end up being more of an upside than having a ridiculously convoluted one.
Yeah, I mean, Mortal Kombat X, I didn't play it for a ton, but the story was kind of all over the place. But it gave you an opportunity to kind of try different characters along the cinematic experience.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
So I don't know that it's necessarily good or bad. I didn't play enough of it to judge that, but it's different, and I applaud them for trying something new for a genre that really, aside from the mechanics, is pretty stale.
James did mention the Dragon Ball Z games, because I'm kind of a DBZ fan. I watched a lot of cartoons. It was called Cheese TV in Australia back in the day. So,
I love that.
Yeah, it was. Cheese TV was the funniest shit, man. So it was like the cartoon program at the beginning, and it was literally run by a couple of high school students who, I swear to God, were stoned every single episode. That was,
they definitely were.
Yeah, that was our cartoon show in Australia, Cheese TV.
Well, you woke up at 7 a.m. before school every day, and if you woke up too early, you'd have to watch the
aerobics.
Women's yoga, aerobics tutorial class, and then it was from 7 a.m. to 8:30 or something. They'd just play DBZ and Beyblades and all sorts of entry-level Japanese shows.
So funny.
It was great. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
I was going to say Mortal Kombat is not a bad place to start. Not only X, but even MK9 I've spoken a lot about, and there's a lot of story elements in that. It's pretty accessible, I think, overall. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that the recent Mortal Kombat games' stories have been pretty poor, honestly. Did you play Injustice 2? I think that's a game with a good story mode for a fighting game. It follows the same structure as Mortal Kombat 10 and 11, but I think the way it's presented and the characters are a bit more interesting. And for those who don't know, Injustice 2 is like a DC Comics property. And I personally actually really dislike Western comic books, but I really liked that storyline. I think Injustice 2 is excellent.
I've heard a lot of good things about it.
Yeah.
Once again, my only
definitely
exposure
recommend
is Donkey's video on it, and he made it look like the stupidest thing ever. So I don't know if that's Donkey or the game actually being terrible. But knowing
probably
that
a little of both.
Yeah, knowing that you're a big fan of it, James, it's probably terrible.
Oh yeah.
God. One of these times I'm going to have to get you guys on recording and just let you two insult each other for 2 hours. I think it would be lovely.
Have at it.
We have 35 episodes of that already, so
drop a steak in between them.
Yeah, but you don't have 35 episodes of Will and I instigating you either. So.
That is true.
No, that's
cheering
true.
on
Yeah.
from the sidelines.
Yeah.
So, what do you say we move on to the lightning round? What do you think, Will?
Sounds good.
That's not a bad idea.
So we try to cater these somewhat to our guests as much as possible, and hopefully we've done a good job with this one. Basically, there's a we're going to be asking you a series of questions, and we'd like you to answer these questions as quickly as possible without giving too much thought to your answer. It's supposed to be a reaction rather than a planned out thought process.
Okay.
Once you answer, that's it. You can't change your mind.
I'm adding one more for Patrick.
Oh,
okay,
excellent.
Go for it. Okay. Let me know when you have that in.
I'm going to shuffle it in the middle too, so it's not
at
the end there.
So
Perfect,
are you asking this to both of us at the same time?
Oh, yeah. So I'm open to suggestions on how we can do that.
James, you answer first, and then I'll answer second, because it gives me more time to think. Lock it in.
Okay, yeah. We know you need the time, right?
So James will answer first every time, and then I'll answer immediately afterwards.
There we go. Fixed it.
Oh wow, that's a drastic change.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Should we? I'm going to move it up one.
Sure.
What do you think?
Yep.
I think that's a better spot.
There we go.
All right. So, are you guys ready?
I'm ready.
I think so.
All right. I wish one of these days I got to get this cool intro music to this.
Oh yeah, we need something
we need
cheesy
something.
maybe too.
Yeah, super 80s montage
Yes.
music. I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna try and find it. I'm gonna try and put it in the background.
Oh yeah, it'll happen.
Let me take a quick note of that. Hold on. This is making for great podcasting.
Neon lights.
Play montage music during lightning round. If I can spell lightning, that'd be great.
It's like me trying to spell episode. I get it wrong every single time.
Okay. All right. Will, take it away.
Okay, here we go. Nintendo or Sega?
Nintendo.
Sony or Microsoft?
Sony.
PC or console?
Console.
Ooh, this is a tough one. Yeah, PC.
Console or handheld?
Ooh, console.
Console.
Mario or Sonic?
Definitely Mario.
Mario. We've only played Sonic once, so Mario.
Modern or retro?
Modern.
Nowadays, definitely retro.
Dark Souls or Metal Gear Solid?
Ooh, Metal Gear Solid.
It's got to be Dark Souls.
Best Souls-like game?
I don't think I've played any.
Nice answer. For me, it's a tie between Sekiro and Hollow Knight.
Worst Souls-like game.
Hollow Knight.
Fuck you, James. So I'm. This probably isn't the worst, but it's the worst that I've played from start to finish. Dark Souls 2.
That's not a Souls-like. That is a Souls game, Patrick.
It qualifies. It's a genre. Geez, it only took like 10 questions. You guys were already fighting. Best first-person shooter.
Doom Eternal.
Oh, come on. Oh my god.
Sorry. I've already answered. I can't take it back.
How do I not have an answer for this? This is ridiculous. I think just the safe option is for me to say Counter-Strike.
Worst first-person shooter.
This one's easy for James.
I want to say Counter-Strike, but I'm going to say System Shock as a spoiler.
God damn it, James. Worst first-person shooter. It's probably one of those. I played this terrible, shitty Doom clone back in the day. Civi did a review of it. I can't remember. It was, you basically play as a it's a terrible Doom clone. You have to rescue babes from an island. It was so bad. It was like moving in that game was like moving on oil. I can't remember the name of it though, but it was terrible.
Oh my god, please find out for me. I need to see this. I love bad games.
I'll find Civi's review of it, but it's a game I played. I have these vague memories of it, and it's so bad.
Alright. Best controller.
PS4.
Xbox One is my go-to at the moment.
Worst controller.
A lot of people would say N64 for this one, but I love that thing to bits out of nostalgia. So I'm gonna go with the original PlayStation controller before it had analog sticks.
And for me, it's very easy. It's N64 because that was designed for someone with 3 hands, and human beings have 2.
Best soundtrack.
Ooh, Persona 5.
Nice.
I'm gonna go with Fury. There's a few games that are up there, but Fury in recent years really is a masterpiece.
Worst soundtrack.
Ape Escape.
Ape Escapes is pretty terrible. Of the games we've played recently, I'm gonna go with Banjo-Kazooie.
Awful.
First console.
Nintendo 64.
So my dad bought my sister and I a PS1 when PS2 was about halfway through the generation. So PlayStation 1, but we were very far behind.
Best console.
PlayStation 2.
I think I have to go with PlayStation 2 as well, although Nintendo Switch is right before it. I just think Switch isn't like... It doesn't have enough games in its catalogue. PS2 holds fonder memories for me.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Oh. We're very organized. Worst console.
Worst console. I know this one. It is... Ouya.
Oh my god.
I remember that thing. What a fucking disaster.
I have one of those paperweights lying around. I didn't get scammed at all, guys.
Oh no.
It's a very fancy paperweight. I'm
gonna go with... God, I've owned so few consoles. Like you guys know, I'm more of a PC gamer. But I think you'd be hard pressed to go through. I'm going to say PS3 at time of release. Am I allowed to do that?
What do you mean? Talladega Nights was a great game.
at time of release specifically, the PS3 launch titles were not great.
The PS3 did take some time to mature.
Yeah.
A console that you wish you had, but didn't.
Since the N64 and PS1 generation, I basically had every single console that I cared about. PS Vita, let's say that.
I'm gonna say Game Boy because all of my friends had the Pokemon game growing up, and I never had a handheld console, so I was always crying about that.
Oh, that's my real answer. Me too.
Yeah.
A console that you had but wish you didn't.
Oh yeah.
I think that in a way, I think it would have been better if I never had a PS1 because I was so disappointed in it because it was so far behind current gen and what I was experiencing on PC.
Best graphics.
Best graphics. Probably Death Stranding.
Yeah, it's very tough. I'm gonna say Witcher 3.
Ugh.
Worst graphics.
Worst graphics. Quake.
Fuck you, James. Come on, man. You don't even believe
It's
that.
so bad.
I'm gonna go with Armored Core. That's a game we played recently that was
I like Armored
atrocious.
Core more than I like Quake.
Oh my god, terrible answer.
Best story.
This is a huge nostalgia boner for me. Final Fantasy X.
I'm gonna say Shadow of the Colossus.
Worst story.
Did you say worst story?
Yeah.
I have a high tolerance for bad stories.
Yeah, you do, mate.
Yeah, I do. Skyrim.
Oh my god.
I can't wait to hear.
I hear Will sharpening a knife right now.
I took my glasses off, man.
So, most recently, the story that's triggered me the most is definitely Chrysalis. So I'm gonna go with Chrysalis.
Really? More than Tribes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hardest game.
StarCraft 1.
F-Zero GX. Fuck that game.
Easiest game.
F-Zero GX. No. Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland.
I'm gonna cheat a bit here and say Gone Home.
Oh my
Good
god.
choice. All-time favorite game.
FF10.
Man, fuck.
This one's easy, Pat.
Way to put me on the spot. I'm gonna say Hollow Knight.
All right.
Really? Okay.
Well, you made it through the lightning round.
It was tough, man. Man, way to put us on the spot. Favorite game? Come on.
Patrick had a story for everyone.
I know. He totally
I know,
ignored the rules.
I'm sorry. Oh, was it meant to be one-word phrases?
Oh
Yeah,
well,
that's all right.
yeah.
I apologize.
No worries.
It's fine.
Lightning round, more like trickle round.
All right, hold on.
goodness.
I would like to hear Will respond to James saying Skyrim's story is terrible.
Oh,
3, 2, 1,
man.
go.
I don't know if I can do it that quickly.
Before that, let me justify this opinion. One of my all-time favorite games was Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, which I played many times, and I loved because of how weird the setting was. Like, you got around the island on these giant fleas, and there were all sorts of weird creatures with weird customs, and then comes along Skyrim, and it's like there's white dudes and snow. And I was very disappointed because I, for many years, skipped the fourth entry in the game, Oblivion. So I was, I think it's more of a matter of expectations not being met as opposed to thinking that it's bad as a standalone.
Okay. Yeah, I can respect that. I didn't play any of the other Elder Scrolls games, so Skyrim was completely new for me, so that's probably why it had more of a profound effect on me.
Yeah.
I was hoping you'd tear them apart, Will.
I mean, I could, but I would have to get some notes ready. I want to make sure I have all my ducks in a row, and right now I don't.
He needs to prepare for your destruction.
Yeah. Yeah. Dismantling.
Can you imagine, like, watching a movie or playing a video game and you encounter the boss and he's like, I'm sorry, I can't fight you right now. I'm not prepared for you. I don't have enough notes.
I can think of a few games.
Oh, goodness. Guys, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you for the past couple hours. Really appreciate you coming on board.
Absolutely.
It's been
really fun.
Awesome. It's been really fun to not talk about a single video game for an hour and a half, which is what we normally do. It's felt a lot more relaxed. Yeah, I've liked the atmosphere.
We definitely would have to have you guys come back on again and just, not that we really followed a format tonight, but, just in general, just have you come by and just shoot the shit with us for a while. And
waffle on.
Yeah.
Well, and we want you guys on our show as well. I mean, obviously, it's really difficult because what we ask from our guests is that they play a game from start to finish, and often it's an old game, and often it's a game that they may not necessarily be enjoying, and that's even to get your foot in the front door. But I was speaking to Drew and said maybe when the Command and Conquer remaster comes out, we maybe have you on. I don't know if there's any old games that you want to revisit, Will, but we are eager to have more and more guests as we move into the future.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'd love to be a part of the show. I could probably think of something. It's tough for me. I do have some older games, but they're mostly fighting games at this point. But
oh man, let's do it.
Maybe that's your introduction, but we'll see. No, I'll definitely mull it over for sure.
Okay, cool.
Well, if there's any technical hurdles that you need to surpass, Will, let me know, and I can maybe try and get you set up with an emulator or something.
Oh, yeah. I'll need supervision, though, so I don't lose my mind.
Yeah, no, I remember hearing you explain how you wanted everything just to work immediately, and if you needed to tinker it, you were out. And James and I have done so much tinkering to get some of these games working. It's like this elaborate workshop process.
Was probably the worst.
Browsing forums that are 20 years old, trying to find
can't
solutions.
I wish I had myself I wish I was videotaping myself the day that I was trying to run that emulator that Damien had me running. Like, I was literally like, my eyebrows were permanently raised. Like, I couldn't get them to just relax. I was like, I'm so done with this. And
Will got so frustrated with trying to set up an emulator that he had a knee-jerk reaction and bought a Sega Saturn and a Dreamcast off of eBay.
And I got the good stuff too. Like, I was looking for like brand new condition. Like, it was a real problem.
Yeah. He would rather spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars than just set up an emulator.
Yeah, and quite.
To be fair, we did do a Sega Saturn game at one point, and it was pretty difficult to get running. Yeah,
that was the Police Noughts one, right?
That was Police Noughts. Yeah.
Oh my god, that game.
That's a Kojima game,
so
right?
Good.
It is.
Yeah, it is.
It's a visual novel.
It's one of his older titles. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah,
it's all right.
I remember listening to that episode, and I had no experience with the game, so it was kind of fascinating to hear you guys talk about it.
Yeah, I like to think that Kojima's best writing came from his earlier games, and was downhill ever since.
You meant to play that game with the light gun for reference, so we had to do some pretty tricky shit to get that working.
Oh my god! Have either of you played Snatcher?
No, that's the one he made previously.
I listened to Kanan Rince's podcast on Snatcher after we did our Police Noughts episode, and it sounds like the story is even better than it is in Police Noughts, although the gameplay seems a lot worse. I'm
so disappointed because the TurboGrafx Mini was released, and I got my hands on a copy, and it includes a copy of Snatcher, but it was only released in Japan, and it's a Japanese version of the game, and I don't know Japanese. So I was
never too late to learn.
I suppose not. I mean, I know there's English translations, and I believe the Sega CD had a English version of the game.
It was really funny. I was looking up one of the walkthroughs for Police Noughts, and this walkthrough I was looking at, the person had obviously they couldn't read Japanese either, because they're like, select the left option, then the right option, and then I know it doesn't make any sense, but select the right option again. And it's like, he's got no idea what he's doing. He just knows how to make the game keep progressing.
Yeah.
Imagine playing a game like that over and over again just so you can kind of figure out the path to get through it.
Yeah,
so oh my God.
Those games are so obscure as well.
Yeah. So, one more time for everybody that's listening, how can they find your podcast?
Okay, so we are once more the Retro Spectives Podcast. That's Retro Space Spectives. We're available on all podcasting platforms. We've also got all of our content on our website, which is rspodcast.net. So if you don't have a podcast catcher, you can directly download all the episodes individually from our website. We've also got heaps of articles there. I write lots of articles, mainly related to the games we've been playing, although I'll occasionally cover a modern game as well. Our Twitter handle is @RetPodcast, but you can find everything you need on our website, rspodcast.net.
All right, excellent. And of course, you can find us on the web at www.wdgrpodcast.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at WDGRPodcast. And of course, we have a link for our Discord room in the show notes. Swing on by there. And swing on by the Retro Spectives Discord room as well, too. It's a pretty cool place.
Yeah, although too much anime discussion. Luckily, we have an anime containment channel, so
it doesn't really contain the anime. Though.
It makes me so mad. It makes me so mad. It's just like the new channel.
So mad. Stay in your lane.
One of the frustrations of running a Discord room is trying to contain discussion to rooms without being like a overlord of the chat.
Yeah.
Like I'm trying very hard not to be overly moderative, but also like encourage people to do things where they're supposed to. And yeah.
Have you ever accidentally deleted one of the channels? Because Patrick did.
Sounds like a nightmare.
We lost months of discussion, Patrick.
Was it the channel or just the whole server?
The channel.
Just the whole channel.
So I was like, you guys have a really cool setup where you've got like this general super topic with then things underneath it. I know, I'll do that as well. I'll have a chat channel just like you guys. And in the process, I managed to just delete the entire general channel.
Oh my God.
No one has ever let me live it down.
Oh, God.
Remember that time?
It was funny because somebody had suggested that we play a game one week, and I was like, I forgot who suggested the game. So I was trying to go back through the chat logs to find who it was, and then realized that it must have gotten deleted in the Great Purge of 2019.
Oh, God. That's amazing that you have a name for it. I love it.
Yeah, very suspicious.
All right, guys. Thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks to everybody that's listening to the show. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Thank you.
Been a
Bye.
pleasure.